Welcome to the Healthy Compulsive Project podcast, where you can take a deep dive to explore the pitfalls and potential of the obsessive-compulsive personality, offering hope and help for perfectionists, workaholics, micromanagers, type A personality, and control freaks. Hello, everyone. Gary Trosclair here, psychotherapist, Jungian psychoanalyst, and author of the Healthy Compulsive Project book, blog, and podcast. Being risk-averse is riskier than you might have thought. You miss opportunities, and your comfort zone becomes a prison where you lose connection with what you desire. This is partially because the risk aversion strategy you're using, both from your early family life and the lives of your ancestors 100,000 years ago, is probably way outdated. That strategy should serve you to live in a fulfilling way, not to limit you to a mere survival in a dull comfort zone. In this episode, I'll talk about what being risk-averse looks like, what its causes are, what the results are, and some suggestions for finding your way out of an outdated comfort zone. So join me for episode 111 of the Healthy Compulsive Project podcast. Your outdated, risk-averse comfort zone is a prison. Chuck it. So let me ask you something. Would you eat meat that had a label that said, best used by February 2nd, 2020? I didn't think so. That would be reckless, not to mention gross. But the truth is, the risk aversion strategies we use are much more outdated than that, in more ways than one, and continuing to use them is reckless. Being too risk averse is sometimes what it comes down to in therapy. Patients may simply be unwilling to take chances and go outside of their comfort zone. That's reckless because their decision is based on very outdated strategies. Those strategies were adopted by our ancestors hundreds of thousands of years ago, yet we still use them. And we may have adopted related strategies again in response to our early environment. It's also reckless to play it safe and not take chances because staying in your comfort zone leads to avoidance and lots of missed opportunities. These missed opportunities include finding a mate, writing a great novel, losing your life savings through an online scam, or skiing in an area prone to avalanches. If that confused you, good. We're making progress already. Risk aversion is confusing and we'll need to sort it out. One confusing aspect of it is that risk aversion can be either good or bad. It's bad when we use outdated risk aversion strategies, as we often do. It could mean acting as if we were still living in the unforgiving environments we evolved in, such as a savanna where taking the risk of leaving your tribe meant fairly certain death by a mob of seriously hungry hyenas. Better to stay in the comfort zone of the tribe, even if they don't like your drumming. It could also mean living as if you're still living with a mother and father that would severely chastise you for getting a B in American history. They would also forbid you to go to Mary Lou's 16th birthday party, at which everyone knew none of your peers would be avoiding risk. That would make you think twice about taking the risk of not studying till your eyes went batty. Timing is a factor in whether or not those risk aversion strategies were good. Those strategies were helpful then. Now they're about as effective as a ticket for the Titanic. But it's also about the purpose of avoiding risk. If it serves to protect what gives your life meaning and your passions, it's doing just what it's supposed to do. Too often, though, it has been hijacked to merely avoid uncomfortable feelings. Instead, it suppresses meaning and passion. While risk aversion can be effective in helping us to live longer, it isn't always effective in helping us to live better. In many cases, it makes life worse. It becomes a high-security prison, and then it's no longer fun to live longer. In this post, I'll explore the manifestations, causes, consequences, and solutions to the problem of outdated risk aversion strategies. While I'm addressing this to my usual audience of people with obsessive-compulsive personality, since risk aversion is a known demon of OCPD, it should also be helpful to people who don't have OCP but do have difficulty taking chances. Now, I know it feels very risky, but taking the chance of wasting your time listening to this entire episode may actually pay off. So first, let's talk about manifestations of risk aversion. Just so that it's clear what I'm talking about, here are some ways that risk aversion shows up. Controlling others, like controlling your kids, your coworkers, your romantic partner. an exaggerated sense of responsibility, as if we could and should control outcomes because the consequences are dire. Controlling our own emotions and behavior, not allowing yourself to feel happy, relaxed, let go, or celebrate. Overworking, working long hours with unnecessary exertion to avoid criticism or failure. Being too careful with other people, people-pleasing for fear of being excluded. Overthinking, overplanning, and procrastination, averting the risk of things not going as you hope. And finally, a shrinking comfort zone, both literally and psychologically. You don't allow yourself to go places. Now we'll talk about causes of being risk-averse. We wouldn't be risk-averse if we weren't getting something out of it, or had gotten something out of it in days of yore. Problem is, the past is way past, and that insurance policy is no longer effective. Not to mention that the premium was higher than a Hermes Birkin handbag, and that's a lot. Risk aversion is a strategy formed from both evolutionary roots and personal experiences. It results from a perfect storm of biological and psychological factors. Our genes mix it up with our environment, et voila, we're risk averse. Together these factors form a knot which seems impossible to untie. Part of what makes that knot so tight is that it's self-reinforcing. Like a noose, it gets tighter when pulled. Avoidance breeds more avoidance. Coddling your anxiety breeds more anxiety. Consequences become causes. We see this most clearly in agoraphobia and claustrophobia. The more you avoid going out or going into an enclosed space, the harder it gets to go out or to go in. But risk aversion operates this way with all of our choices, such as not trying new things, not being vulnerable, or adamantly refusing to sing karaoke. As with an actual knot, the way to untie it is to start pulling at the loosest part, and eventually it comes apart. We'll get to that. Now we're going to talk about the adaptive anachronisms of human evolution. Risk aversion is a strategy for extending life that was adaptive in previous environments. Depending upon what you want, it usually doesn't work in our current environment. Psychologist Stephen Hertler sees risk aversion as part of a slow life history, which is characterized by excessive caution and hypervigilance, future focus, overpreparedness, and long-term planning, minimizing unnecessary risk, protecting resources by being loss-averse and conservation-driven, harm avoidance, and delayed gratification. Living this way helps you live longer and makes it more likely that you'll pass your genes on and your kids will survive. Whoopee. More specifically, Hertler argues that this cluster of traits is characteristic of OCPD, which is Obsessive-Compulsive Personality Disorder. It results in parsimony, hoarding, rigid planning, and work devotion. Together they form a behavioral strategy that was optimized for environments where risk minimization ensured survival. Yeah, we're back in that savannah again. This means OCPD is fundamentally oriented toward avoiding danger and minimizing loss, even at the cost of flexibility, spontaneity, and any satisfaction other than mere survival. Hertler contrasts this slow life history strategy with a fast life history strategy. That strategy is typical of impulsive, risk-seeking personality types like the antisocial personality type. These are the people that infuriate you with their sloppiness, their aversion to rules, and indulgence in gratifying their every whim at the expense of others. Hertler describes OCPD as an adaptive anachronism, which means that we revive old strategies for contemporary purposes. These traits were potentially adaptive environments hundreds of thousands of years ago with harsh climates and survival uncertainty. This resulted in states like high conscientiousness, careful planning, risk avoidance, and strict adherence to rules that help people to survive. And it might seem like they're adaptive now, but too often they're maladaptive, if you consider quality of life. So this means that risk aversion is hardwired to some degree. And like tails on dogs, nipples on men, and a refusal to ride in airplanes, genes often stick around after they're no longer needed. And like most genes, they can get turned on or off by their environment. Now, this is simplifying things, but work with me here. Now we're going to talk about outdated evolutionary strategies that are re-enlisted in early environments. Environments that may turn this gene on include over-controlling parents, undependable parents, or parents so perfect that you just couldn't tolerate disappointing them. While our great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandparents used caution to survive physically, you may have learned to use it to survive psychically in your early environment. While your forebears were avoiding extinction and you were avoiding shame, the means of survival were similar. Risk aversion. Take no chances. Your early environment, and that includes school, neighborhood, country, may have triggered you to activate ancient adaptive anachronisms to protect you against psychic suffering, disappointing parents, and bullies in your phys ed class. I'm extrapolating just a bit here, but I suspect that what has happened over the long term is that the risk aversion strategies we used to stay alive back then become overgeneralized. We feel all too easily that we need to employ them now, as if we need to avoid any risk of psychic suffering, as if psychic suffering were dangerous rather than just uncomfortable. It's a thing. Psychology researchers call it experiential avoidance, or EA. Experiential avoidance describes a behavioral pattern in which we do whatever we can to avoid unpleasant internal experiences, aka feelings. This means that we make decisions motivated by avoiding the risk of uncomfortable emotions, and our behavior becomes inhibited. According to a study by Wheaton, people with OCPD experience greater EA than your everyday commoner. It's as if the caution that protected us from dangerous hyenas now gets triggered proactively when we fear that a colleague could criticize or even attack us for proposing a creative solution to a business problem. Better go conservative. Now, don't tell your colleague I compared them to a hyena. That would not go over well. Many of us, especially people with OCPD, often overestimate potential negative outcomes. We feel a responsibility to prevent errors and to avoid losing control. These tactics lead to risk-avoidant behavior. So, you live longer but not better, and this is typical of the OCP strategy of honoring quantitative preferences over qualitative ones. You're in a prison of your own making. Let's talk now about avoiding the wrath of the inner dictator. Interestingly, one of the strongest motivators of risk aversion is avoiding the self-condemnation that will occur if they take a chance and get it wrong. They would lambaste themselves and never trust themselves again to take a chance. Notice the terms I used, lambaste themselves and never trust themselves. Who's lambasting who? And who's not trusting who? You can call it the manager, the dictator, the judge, or whoever gives you grief for not getting your decisions just right. Many people with strong risk aversion believe that they would not be able to escape the judgment of this part, and would not only be miserable, they would also become even more limited because they would trust themselves even less. The result is that their life gets smaller. Witness Wilbur. Wilbur has been working on a screenplay for 8 years now. He's afraid that if he shops it around to agents before it's ready and it gets rejected, he will never forgive himself. The self-criticism would be excruciating, and he would never be able to trust himself to submit a piece of writing ever again. It's the judgmental dictator that says, it's not ready, and Wilbur feels it would attack him if he did get rejected. It's the judgmental dictator that says severe judgment is the only way to make his writing good and to get it sold. But it's bringing about the very thing it says it's trying to prevent. Failure. It's hard to write with a gun to your head, and an unsubmitted screenplay is a failing screenplay. This is exactly what dictators do. They cause a problem, and then they tell you that they're the only ones who can solve it. Now we're going to talk about results, the risks of being risk-averse. The results of risk aversion are worse than you thought. It's not just that you miss out on the greatest show of all time because you thought the traffic would be epic. It's also that you start to lose interest in any shows. In fact, over time, this strategy becomes a deeply ingrained habit. It leads you to lose interest in desire itself and to put safety in its place. This strategy is not just boring. Sticking with it means that eventually you have no idea what you want. Instead, you rely on the opinions of others, quantitative measures, and rationalizations as your North Star, rather than a deep conviction about where you want to go. And the cost of these strategies is high anxiety, intolerance of uncertainty, and discomfort with spontaneity. Missed opportunities. Now, this one is obvious to your head, not to your heart. Your head can see that isolating might keep you from meeting Mr. or Ms. Right, but all your heart can feel is the fear that you'll get hurt again. Sometimes past painful experiences have more weight than possible future good ones. On the one hand, this is understandable. On the other, it's a sad reminder of how we can maintain risk aversion strategies from the past that hold us back. A different approach to the issue of missed opportunities comes from the subject of regret. In a landmark study about regret, 2 psychologists found that while we may regret some actions taken in the short term, in the long term, we regret not taking actions much more. What do you want written on your tombstone? The next result we're going to talk about is loss of desire. Missed opportunities are serious consequences of risk aversion, but a deeper and more systemic consequence is that we slowly destroy our connection with desire. So much so that we no longer know what we want. That makes it easier to avoid the risk of failing, being disappointed, or try any new activities that have risk in them. But the truth is that loss of desire ensures failure to live a meaningful life. Priorities shift from passion to safety. Motivation fades and life becomes flat. The technical term for loss of desire is anhedonia, and it's often a symptom of depression. When people have anhedonia, they have at least some of the following symptoms. They can't enjoy things they used to enjoy. They can't feel good about what they accomplish. They feel numb or emotionally flat. They lose interest in relationships. They don't enjoy food as much, and their sex drive goes down. What I'm describing as loss of desire may not be as extreme as anhedonia, but it is similar. It's an absence of motivation except for getting things done, which is not a balanced psychological diet. When we don't know what we want, we end up rationalizing. I mean that in the worst sense. We like to think we're being rational when really we're just making excuses for avoiding the things we fear. We fill in the blank with so-called logic. Another result of operating from risk aversion is that the fear of retribution from the inner dictator becomes a major motivator. Even the things that you used to desire are held captive by risk aversion. Desires turn into shoulds, and next thing you know, the dictator is taking them over too. For instance, going to the zoo to enjoy the orangutans becomes a mandatory assignment, based not on desire, but avoidance of the wrath of the internal dictator. And the final result I'll talk about is the prison of comfort zones. The last result of outdated risk aversion is that we live in a comfort zone. This is an ironic term since we die psychically there. These function more like prisons than true comfort zones, but it's as if we're under a spell and we can't see that the small life we've limited ourselves to is the price we pay for not taking chances. Okay, now let's talk about solutions. First of all, you're not alone. I'm going to talk about the heroic struggle. If getting out of your comfort zone feels daunting, don't worry. You're not alone, and many people have done it. Virtually all heroes have struggled with risk aversion. They might appear to be cool and calm, but the first chapter of their journey is often about them refusing the call to their heroic task. The would-be hero sees the risk involved and says, "No thanks, I'm staying in my comfort zone." But then they end up in the belly of the whale or some other equally distressing place. The next step is always leaving their known world. They change their mind and decide to accept the calling. They have to leave home, and they are not allowed to take a path that anyone has taken before them. Recall Harry Potter. He didn't think he was up to being a wizard, and it took Hagrid convincing him that he could. This was all about taking back what belonged to him, his heritage and his authenticity, his true self. What do you need to take back from being risk-averse? What in you has been suppressed for safety? The temptation in life and in therapy is to talk endlessly about why it's hard to take certain risks. It might seem like you're working on the issue, but the analysis may serve as an avoidance. It's the comfort zone that becomes a prison. Here are some steps you can take to approach a world that feels dangerous. And as is usually the case with growth, these steps take insight, emotional engagement, and action. Note, While I recommend psychotherapy for anyone who wants to lower their risk aversion, it's especially important for those of you who might have trauma in your background. First, develop insight, and I suggest that you actually write out, where does your risk aversion come from? Is it outdated? What purpose did it serve for you? Does it still help? Name 3 opportunities you've missed. Name 3 desires risk aversion has suppressed. And finally, what are the priorities in your life that deserve the protection of your risk aversion? Next, engage emotionally. Again, write all of these out, but also take the time to feel into each one of them. Notice what happens in your body as you do. Learn relaxation techniques you can call to mind when you're approaching your fears. Don't expect to completely banish your fear before trying. Accept that you can't predict how you will feel. Start small. Practice sitting with anxious feelings rather than trying to achieve safety. What are the particular feelings you wanted to avoid? Identify the figure in your head that would attack you for not getting it right. And finally, face down the worst-case scenario and see that you would survive. Now we're going to talk about taking action. Use meditation, progressive muscle relaxation, or exercise as if they were medication to lower your baseline of anxiety. They can be just as effective as medication. Not to say that you shouldn't take your medication. Next, draw a circle of your comfort zone and include the things you're comfortable with. Then, draw a larger circle around it and name 3 places, things, or people you want to include that you've left out of your life so far. Then, name 3 steps you will take to incrementally approach each of those. Use risk aversion to protect the things that are most important to you. Getting it right is less important than gradually taking the chance. And give yourself credit for each time you do take a chance. Remember, it's the trying that reduces fear, not the planning. Courage is made, not found. So this episode can only serve as an introduction. For more suggestions, you might want to listen to the following episodes. Keys to Facing OCPD, Anxiety, and Fear, and that was episode 28. This is Not a Test, 3 Steps to Winning the Battle Against Insecurity. That was podcast episode 85. Or Chronic Urgency Stress Syndrome and That Monster Hiding Under Your Bed. That was podcast episode 54. And finally, Self-Compassion, the evidence-based antidote to maladaptive perfectionism. That was podcast episode 29. You can find transcripts of this podcast with links to research sources and lots more at the Healthy Compulsive blog, www.thehealthycompulsive.com. If you'd like to subscribe to the Healthy Compulsive podcast, hit that subscribe button. And for a thorough guide to cultivating the positive potential of the compulsive personality, find my book on Amazon, The Healthy Compulsive, Healing Obsessive-Compulsive Personality Disorder and Taking the Wheel of the Driven Personality. And if you find any of these helpful, let others know by leaving a review. Till next time, enjoy the drive.